Well, it took a little while longer than I initially thought, mainly because the weather wasn't playing nice, and I decided to build both of them instead of just doing two separate done build videos, and just have them all in one whole video. With that also said, I do not know how to pronounce their names. I'm going to try and pronounce their names once and fail, and then just go back to calling them dog and cat until I can figure out how to more properly pronounce their names. Korone, Inugami Okayu, Nekomata, I believe. Again, I'm not even going to try and pronounce their names. I'm just going to call them dog and cat because it's easier on me. So with that said, just like with Gara, these are also life size, and they took about a week or so each, give or take. I actually had her done for a while, but like I said, the weather wasn't playing nice, and speaking of the weather, you can already see it's starting to come in. But yeah, they're finally done, and I got a bunch of flies all over the place, but that's to be expected. And of course, the local helicopter just has to roam through the neighborhood right at this proper moment. So I'll let the helicopter go by, and then I'll come back yet again. Alright, with that nuisance out of the way, just like with Gara, these two do break apart, though not in the way Gara did technically. Well, I can't remove the arms on these two, though I was kind of thinking of doing that, especially with dog here, but luckily it didn't need to happen. So with that said, they do look like they're connected to each other. When they're not, they can be fully taken apart or fully spread away from each other. And all you need to do is just literally do this. And just like that, they're now pulled apart that way. So someone at my local convention wants to take a photo with her or with her, they can either do that. Or if they want to take a photo in the middle where they're side to side, they can also do that. So when it comes to actually taking these two apart to transport them to my conventions and whatnot, well, they just split in half basically. Just grab her by the neck and she splits apart. So one issue I was having with her, and of course also with her, is the upper body and the lower body going side to side from each other. To remedy the issue with her, I just have magnets on the bottom right here that correspond with magnets right there. That's all that's necessary to stop her from going side to side. So give me a second. And when it comes to her tail, attaching her tail is even more simpler. I'm not even using magnets on her. I'm just using a simple friction fit with a key, with a little wooden dowel with a key in it. That corresponds to a PVC, to this little PVC pipe right here with a popsicle stick cut in, that's hot glued into the end and whatnot. And that's all that's necessary to hold the tail in place. It's the easiest solution I can come up with compared to her. Getting her tail set up was a freaking nightmare and a half. I'll explain why in a little bit when I get to her. So one other thing I want to mention is the legs and whatnot. So the way this one is put together, the legs are their own individual piece that then attach to the pants and whatnot, or the shorts and whatnot. So what I had to do is something a little bit different. So I did the normal wooden dowels as the main superstructure, but to make sure everything's going to stay nice and secure, I made the wooden dowels go to right about, where am I showing? Right about there. And then to make sure the wooden dowels stay put, I have a foam board strewn throughout right here, and I have a little bit of foam board right there. And then what I did is I used my big high temp hot glue gun, and I just hosed all the surfaces down with hot glue. Surprisingly enough, that's all that's necessary to hold everything together. You'll be surprised how strong the hot glue in these models really is, and how hard they kind of are to tear down when I go to, well, recycle them and whatnot. With that said, I'm not going to be recycling my HoloLive girls. I'm going to figure out a place to store them. These ones are keepers. But again, the way I build these things, they're really robust. So with that said, let me put her back together and we'll talk about her next. Alright, so dog. She's a little bit different. She still splits apart in the middle like a cat here does. So if I pull her from here, you can see she splits apart. And of course I go to put her down on here. Reason why I had this mat here is because the grass is still a little wet from morning dew. And here we have her skirt. Her skirt is a little different. You can tell that she was the first one I built, and she's the second because she's far more cleaner in the grand scheme of things compared to her. So with that said, here's the skirt. But before I remove the skirt, I need to remove the tail. The tail is held on by a magnet. You can't see the magnet, but there's a magnet in there. It's a big rare earth magnet. So we got a big rare earth magnet in there. And then I can now pull the skirt. The skirt itself has magnets in it too that correspond with magnets inside of her, but you can't see them. Again, she was the first one I built, so the procedure and whatnot isn't as precise. I do want to try and retrofit her skirt, but I don't know if I can do that. And plus, it does generally work. But the magnets line up with the skirt, and they generally stop the body from swaying back and forth. It will sway back and forth, but not that much. Hers sways back a lot more. And of course, here we see the lower body. And of course, here's the internal superstructure for her. It's kind of just a dumpster fire of all sorts of popsicle sticks, hot glue, and everything. And you can kind of see us having some major stressing issues with the way the former was going to work. I mean, heck, I had to cut this out right here because it was actually interfering with the magnets. So obviously, again, you can tell that she's my first one because she's, again, not that clean compared to her. I did have issues with her, but not like with her. And when it comes to that big old rare earth magnet, you can see how much I had to drill out the back right here multiple times to try and finally get something to actually work. So when it comes to actually the tail attaches to where you can probably see a little bit of this little ring piece here, or dirt. You can actually see that's where the outline for the magnet is. This little guy right here is a little resting point that also allows me to lock the tail in for when I go to insert it into the back via that little hole in the skirt. That way so everything properly locks. So to show you what I mean, here is the skirt. I generally know where the center is. Well, actually you can see where the center is. I have this little center point. And that little center point, if my memory serves, centers right about, well actually I can just do this. Go like that, and it's more or less centered. Then I just grab the tail and I just shove it in there, wiggle it around to it clicks, and now I more properly center the skirt. And then I grab her upper body. And as you can see, it doesn't fully align, so sometimes I need to lift her back up and move the skirt back. But since I'm using, since I can't do that one-handed, give me a second. And just like that, her skirts are now back in working order again. Probably the best option for me to do with making her skirt to properly mount properly is like just increase the magnet size, like get some bigger rare earth magnets and literally just lay them on top of the current set. And that'll provide more than enough extra strength to make sure the skirt really locks in place, because you can kind of see when it doesn't want to lock right, it does do this right here. But again, I'm totally fine with it. It's not completely hideous, and again, generally speaking, they look perfectly fine. And the imperfections are just part of the craft. There's no way to make these perfect. With that also said, I do not want to do these out of 3D printers because one, you just can't print like this with a 3D printer, and two, a 3D printer kind of takes away the uniqueness that is hand building these Papercraft figurines from scratch, basically. With that said, both of these two were actually printed from an Epson Eco Tank. Excluding a little bit of her here, for some reason my Epson was having a real hard issue printing red here. It actually looks pretty dull here, even with the official HP red ink. And whatever, this is a weird red that all my printers except one had a hard issue printing, and this is the best red I could get. But the rest of her printed out completely fine, and of course she printed out perfectly fine. And when it comes to the Epson Eco Tank that I was talking about, I have yet to replace the ink in that thing. I used that to build Gara, I used it to build these two, And I got at least one more round of ink left to build one more figure when that time comes. So with that said, I don't know what else to talk about other than get these flies off my freaking figures. But yeah, now I have 2 figures to stick to my local convention. And now the next step for me to do is to figure out a little way to actually lug them around. I'm going to have a separate video on that because I have an idea of what I'm going to do. I just need to make sure I have enough foam board laying around the house to actually achieve what I want to do. With that now said, I'm going to now take the photos I need so I can upload them to Twitter and whatnot.